Okay, let us begin. Welcome to Outsmarting Antisemitism. We're excited to present this course. It's an important topic, as everyone knows. One of the things they say, for as long as anti-Semitism has existed, Jews making jokes about anti-Semitism have existed. So, that's one of the fuels. So there was once a guy who comes into the bar and he notices a Jew sitting there. So he wants to get an attack at the Jew. So he says, shots for everyone at the bar on me, except for that Jew, that dirty Jew. And so the bartender pours to the whole crowd. And the Jew doesn't budge. He doesn't give a smirk. He doesn't take offense. And so the anti-Semite does it a second time. He says, shots for everyone, except for that dirty Jew, on me. And the Jew gives a big smile. So he turns to the bartender. He's like, what's with this nutty Jew? It's like, oh, he owns the bar. So sometimes we're thinking of, so in this course, we actually are going to take a very unique approach. Because in the past, unfortunately, we're dealing with a sad reality where there is an uptick in anti-Semitic attacks. Last week at the Stratford School in Plainview, there were swastikas drawn over the playground. Hofstra University just today had two swastikas. So there's been an uptick in recent in attacks, at least noticeable, at least reported attacks, because to be honest, we don't really know. Stan just notified me that in the past 20 years, he's been punched in the gut for being a Jew twice. But did you report that to the police, Stan? Did you report that to the police?
No, I did
we
not.
can't. No, you did not. So
because of the end result of it, there was no need.
Right. So so we don't really have good data to really know, because just because there's an uptick in reported cases, we don't really know for sure. But there's definitely a feeling throughout the country, especially hitting Western Jews very strongly, this idea that anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head. We have this feeling that, anti-Semitism is a thing of the past, and that this topic, this anti-Semitism topic, JLI actually thought of presenting this topic 30 years ago, and they felt that people wouldn't care about the topic. They're like, people wouldn't care about this topic because they think anti-Semitism is not relevant to Western Jews. Unfortunately, today, that perception has greatly changed. American Jews do feel that there's a great rise. What's the number here? We're looking at figure 1.1. In the past 2 years, I have considered leaving Britain due to anti-Semitism. That was the question. More than half, a large percentage considered leaving Britain, or at least changed their open displays of their Jewishness because of the fears of anti-Semitism. So this is a very strong, very relevant topic for today. So, anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, we see is clearly on the rise, trending upwards, at least according to reported accounts of attacks. So this is a very sad reality. And that's why this topic is so important. However, there is an important perception, an important outlook that we need to have that is just as vitally important. Many Jews have grown up with the feeling, with the foundation, to teach their children never again. In other words, many Jews, their core Jewish identity is never again. We won't allow the Holocaust to happen again. And that is the core of their Jewish identity. So if we look at figure 1.6, I wonder if we have a slide on it. No. Figure 1.6, they say what is essential part of what being Jewish means to them, right? If you have to ask, what's an essential, think about the question for yourself. What is an important part of your Jewish identity? What's important for a Jew? What does that mean to you? So the response that was given more than any other response, we're on page 8, is remembering the Holocaust. That was the number one response that Jews gave for what defines them as a Jew, is that they remember the Holocaust. All the way at the bottom, 15, and this makes me personally sad, is observing Jewish law. That's the least. Remembering the Holocaust, the highest. Leading an ethical and moral life, which you could say, what does it have to do with Judaism? But okay, working for justice, equality, being intellectually curious, continuing families' traditions, caring about Israel. Number one, highest, is remembering the Holocaust. And this has been, marching orders, galvanizing for the youth. We are not going to let the Holocaust happen again, and we should remember it. But there's a certain risk. And what is the risk? The risk is that Judaism ends up becoming a reaction. What does it mean to be Jewish? We're reacting to the anti-Semites. When your whole identity is about a reaction, it's a very weak identity. Because what do you stand for? I understand what you stand against. You understand against people trying to kill you, wipe you out. But what do you stand for? And so that's not what this course is about. This course is not to overemphasize how many people hate us and how they're going to destroy us and never again. That's not the main goal, because that's not the only part of Jewish identity. That's one element. Anti-Semitism is one thing that a Jew has to deal with amongst many other risks that exist to the Jewish people today. So let's read text 1a, and we'll start with Genya. If you could read first text 1a.
1a.
Page 9.
Okay, sorry. Oh, okay. Anti-Semitism is not the sum total. Most Jews will immediately step forward when Jews anywhere are being attacked by anti-Semites. This is, of course, as it should be. What is regrettable, however, is that for some Jews, the fight against anti-Semitism becomes the sum total of their Jewish identity. Recently, a much respected Jewish communal leader lamented to me that he regretted not having educated his children about Jewish traditions and culture. He was, however, very proud of the fact that he had embedded within them a total intolerance of anti-Semitism. His kids were prepared to be at the barricades to do battle against this hatred, and many others as well. His comments made me sad. Anti-Semitism has become the drummer to which his family's Jewish identity marches. They know of Jew as object, not subject. In other words, what is done to Jews becomes far more significant than what Jews do. Oh my God. This well-intentioned Jewish father has deprived his children of a rich, multifaceted legacy. They have been taught to see themselves mainly as perennial victims. This cedes to the oppressor control over one's destiny. It leaves many Jews, including this man's children, aware of what to be against, but not what to be for. That is brilliant. That is amazing.
Okay, and in the words of a journalist, Barry Weiss, he's very put so well. The Jewish people were not put on earth to be anti-Semites. We were put on earth to be Jews. So that's a very powerful idea. So we're addressing this topic because it is an area of concern, and we need fresh ideas. We can't just be harping on the same ideas. We need to figure out how to outsmart anti-Semitism, but we just want to remember that our response to anti-Semitism is just one facet of our Jewish identity. It shouldn't sum up our whole Jewish identity. So what are the some, and if you think about it, could you imagine raising your kids with their whole identity is that being Jewish means you'll always be attacked? What kind of pride does that give to a person in wanting to stand up proud as a Jew? You know, if you constantly say it's so hard to be a Jew, everyone hates us, then your kids will pick up the message. They'll hear it loud and clear and they'll say, okay, let me do everything I can to be far away from this tradition of people that are always hated. So
Rabbi,
what are we going to
Rabbi,
do? Yes.
Rabbi, I just want to make a comment because it's a very sensitive issue, you know, when you're raising your children. But the other effect is the following: kids don't have the understanding of what anti-Semitism is, but it becomes justified in their mind. Meaning, if so many people hate Jews, there must be a valid reason for it. And
That's
if
right.
everybody loves the non-Jews, maybe I should become part of that. And
That's right. So
it's really systemic, because unlike you, where you grew up in a very, you know, Jewish type of environment, that was not the situation in my case. And it was a subliminal type of attitude when my sons would go to the non-Jewish households, that there was something systemically wrong with being a Jew.
yeah. So we're going to address that in this course. It's going to be addressed in lesson 2, hopefully. So in figure 1.7, we go through the driving questions of this course, which is on page 11.
Question.
So
I'm really sorry. What does that quote mean? Jewish people are not put on earth to be anti-Semites or anti.
anti-Semitic.
Oh, I see. Anti.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
double
So
negative.
figure 1. Yeah. So figure 1.7. You know, these are the course's driving questions. If you have any of these questions, they're going to be addressed in this course. Number 1, what are some tools for coping with fears triggered by anti-Semitism? Some people feel very afraid and they cover up. I know a woman that I'm trying to convince her to put on a mezuzah on her door, and she just won't do it. She's afraid. She's afraid. She believes in mezuzah, but she just does not want to be attacked. She doesn't want. You know, number 2, what role does faith play in addressing anti-Semitism? Number 3, what are the best strategies to reduce anti-Semitism? And I'm saying the word reduce because we're not promising in this course a method to get rid of anti-Semitism. The prophets promise us that it'll be here as long as there are Jews, there'll be anti-Semites until Mashiach comes. One of the promises of Mashiach will be that there will be no more anti-Semites. The nations of the world will come to respect us and adore us and do everything to assist us. Number 4, what are the root causes of anti-Semitism? How does identifying these factors impact our efforts to prevent the hatred? Number 5, how can we counter Israel-focused anti-Semitism? And how can we determine when criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic? Not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. So how do you know how do you identify which is not? Number 6, how can we forestall well-meaning Jewish youth from unwittingly lending their voices to anti-Semitic agendas? We see this all the time, that the youth lend their support, but they don't even know that this point of view actually is playing on an anti-Semitic trope. And number 7, what's the best strategy for dealing with a public figure who takes an unfavorable position toward us? You know, you have someone who voices an anti-Semitic position, and what should our response be? Do we create a mob to cancel them? Do we try to convince them out of it, debate them? What is the right approach? So we'll answer all these questions in this lesson. I do want to give you, this wasn't part of the course, but I think I've picked up from preparing this course that a lot of the ideas in here that are unique come from the Rebbe. The Rebbe has faced many, many different forms of anti-Semitism. His father was arrested by the communists and tortured and exiled and died in exile. Then he lost siblings and family to the Nazis. And throughout his life has experienced many anti-Semitic attacks, but he had a very unique approach. And just like his outlook for what is necessary to keep the Jewish future alive post the Holocaust was unique approach and very successful in that. So his response to anti-Semitism is also very unique. So a lot of this course is based on him. So I figured we should show a video that will give us a certain premise for how the Rebbe tried to address all these issues. Hold on, let me look at that.
Der Igris Rambam ist da, Jigeres, was beschreibt sein Leben, sein Seder Ayem und sein Seder Achayim. Zet gewähne als ein Mensch, aber Yisuri. Afal Pikein, kommt zu der Maskone mehr in der Woche und sagt, das ist der Schkoffe von Aiden, der Schkoffe von Taylor, als diese Aiden, was mir darf gucken auf der Welt bei ein Taylor. Mit Artikler Taylor, mit Abitochen, Chosek, wie wäre dort meidig, bekam man die Zeus, was kommen a Reis von der Hanoch.
I considered running for the United States Congress in Florida.
In 1989, I was running for Congress, something that had been a dream for a long time.
It was a big financial undertaking. He had sold a business. He was hiring people, and he was, he wasn't working, so we were going more and more debt. We were young and didn't realize the impact of it.
I had no idea how really awful politics can be in terms of everything's reduced to bumper stickers, talk, bumper sticker language, nasty tactics. It was rough. I went a lot through it. I did not win. We went up to my family's home up in the Berkshires, licking my wounds from a campaign.
Just needed to just be away from everything. He didn't have a job, and he lost a lot of money, and he was at a really, really, really down time. All of a sudden, he gets a call from Rabbi Groner.
The Rebbe said that I should not be downtrodden, I should be happy. Although I didn't win, it was still a bracha, and that I would be able to go on to make other contributions.
His entire demeanor, his entire way of thinking was different. Was different after it.
Al derech wie das ist bei Chayev ha-Protim shel ha-Pesach, ha-Meir Nevuchim, al derech sei das bei Chayev von Kol Am Yisrael. Sagt mir na Yiden ha-Zivui, Iv das Hashem besimcha. Und der noch in derselbe Teile, wo das ist a Hero, sagt mir na wenn is a Yid Eved Hashem, i das bechol drachecha doeu. Das ist a 24 Shoah Misles, is Eved Hashem, darf stehen in der Tnur von Simcha.
In 1956, my father had this building in Montreal. The ground floor of the building was his business, was the store, and the upper floors, the 2 floors, were rented out to small manufacturers. It was an 80-year-old building, and the insurance company told us that they were canceling the insurance. He didn't know how to deal with it. Everything was all in inventory. The inventory was flammable and everything could go at any time. He didn't feel he had the wherewithal to come up with enough money to tear it down and rebuild. He became very depressed. He came to New York with the plans for the building, and I joined to visit the Rebbe. My father was up at the desk with his hands flat on the desk, and he was bent over, and that's really how he had been for a couple of months, kind of bent over and depressed. The Rebbe said, "Reb Nosson, stand up straight." My father took his hands off the desk and he stood up straight, and then he told him that he has to be besimcha, and he has to be like a soldier who goes out to battle and doesn't know what's going to be, but he has the emunah that he's going to win. That's how you have to go back to Montreal and into your bank, to your bank manager, to the mortgage company, with full confidence that the Ribbono Shel Olam is on your side, and you're gonna be able to pull it off.
Können sich bei sich werden erschrockener und herangefallener, was hat für ein Schliches? weil sie wird das können mit Malle sein, sollten nicht so wissen sein, dass sie mehr nicht bei die, was haben mehr nicht wie eine Bossen. Der aber, was in der eine Bosse, ist jeder guckt auf Welt, ist beim Sumore Menechem, hebt auf früher der eine Bosse sein, und geht guck auf den Himmel. Demut der Setter Ruru mi bore Eile werdet beschaffen unter die Welt tegen. Und unter Demut habt Sache, das ist eine Welt, wo das ist Pardes und der Gani, wie genuni Shela Kodesh Baruch Hu.
ההורים שלי נכנסו לרבה. אמא שלי נכנסת, והיא בוכה לרבה. wenn פה hat auch mit dem Maschinen schmier. Will nicht gehen mit dem Maschinen. Hört nicht. Und will, dass der Rebbe soll גם הברוכה, זה soll ohne mehr. הרבי אמר לאמא שלי, tot vertelt er auch mit dem Maschinen, weil schämte, verstehe ich. Dein Bruder, dann ממשיך sein gehen mit dem Maschinen. Und wird nicht sterben in Shidduchim. Und dann בשים אנחנו בטוב לבוב. אחר כך אמא שלי אמרה לרבי, אני הורדתי את המכשיר, אני רציתי שהרבי ייתן פרופת שאני אשמע. וקיוויתי שאני אשמע, שהרבי יברך ויפעול למעלה, שאני אשמע. כשהם יצאו, הכנסתי לרבי. הבאתי לרבי את הפתק. והוא אומר לי תוך כדי קריאה, ת"ז, בשמחו בטוב לבוב. והרבי הרים את העיניים. ושואל אותי. Du hörst mir, ja, אמרתי לרבי, כן. הרבי אמר לי, אתה ממשיך sein kein mit dem Maschinen. Und du wirst sein בשמחה בטוב לבוב. Und du wirst sein kein, du zugefangen nach zu freuen. Und du wirst lernen כמו קידושין. את fragt deine חברים, את רד mit den חברים. Und dann mal Kirche mit dem Ebenbesten. Und du wirst מצליח sein. Mit Dr. Rebbe, wo ich viel habe, zu lernen gut. Der Rebbe hat gesagt, dann sei bis Simchen. Und du wirst מצליח sein.
Was hast du sagt, dass darf sein so mehr, ist Simen, als hat von was zu sein so mehr. Wo mit dem beim nicht monen kein Sach, wo das nicht genommen ist, das Heper von Teres selbst. Und das hat wie von Teres selbst.
כשיצאתי מיחידת, הרגשתי שהרבי נתן לי כזה דחיפה שצריך להיות בשמחה. שברוך השם התחתנתי, הקמתי בית נאמן בישראל, ילדים פריים ושלמים, חיתנתי כמה ילדים. זה המסר שאני אומר, להיות בשמחה, וברגע שתהיה בשמחה, אתה תצליח.
He walked out of there a different person. The Rebbe just changed him from being despondent and worried to being confident. In fact, he shortly after managed to get the mortgage and managed to get it at a very good rate, and he did the building.
After the Rebbe's call, we moved to Maryland, and he got a presidential appointment with President Bush.
I was a senior diplomat and VP of the U.S. International Development Corporation. The impact of the Rebbe's message to me was that we all try to write our own book of what we want our life to look like. But God has a much better book in mind.
Bischaß wird durchgenommen mit dem Gedanke, mit der Aschkofe Alpitera. Dem wird beeilt Pnei Melech Chai. Und lernt Teiro mis Mekaye Mitzvahs mit Teich Archove v'Arvocho Kipshutom Begashmiyus.
Okay, so that's the outlook we're going to take for this course. That Jews have to be joyous, Jews have to be happy, but we still have to address this important topic and not push it under the rug. So I want you to take a moment to do the exercise on page 12. And Okay, and we're going to come back to this exercise. We're going to call our responses later to see if we've made any movement throughout this first lesson. So, question number 1. Have you or anyone close to you recently been the victim of a verbal or physical anti-Semitic assault? If no, consider a recent anti-Semitic incident that you heard about. After you take a moment to reflect on that, question 2, what were your immediate feelings after the incident? You know, when you heard news of the Tree of Life shooting or the Chabad and Poway shooting, or the personal incident that happened to you, you know, what was your immediate responses, A, B, and C? And 3, what were some of the, not the feelings, but the actions? What were the actions you took as a result of the incident? Okay, so let's begin with the feelings. Anyone want to share some of the feelings they had after they heard the tragic news or they experienced an anti-Semitic attack? Barbara, we can't hear you, but I see you.
I am an attorney, and I experienced throughout my career anti-Semitism. I would often be in the courthouse. At the time that I was practicing, not only were there few women lawyers, but there were also few women Jewish lawyers, and certainly not that many Jews. It sounds surprising, but that's the way it was. And I ended up representing the Chabad, actually, when we fought against the borough of Watchung that didn't allow the menorah in the town square in the early 2000s. And instead of hiding as a Jew, I decided to use that case as an example. And my adversary was the acting governor, imagine this, of the state of New Jersey, who fought us in federal court to put the menorah on. And if it wasn't for Mendy Herson being as brave as he was, because it was a secular court, we ended up winning. Now, the story is actually more interesting than that, because not only was the menorah put up, and then I received the title as the menorah lawyer, walking in all to these anti-Semitic situations. Everybody, not only was I no longer hiding as a Jew, with the last name being Schwartz, I might add, but I found out recently that case, and I told Mendy Herson this less than a week ago, that case, at the time that the case happened, the Christmas tree was not called the Christmas tree. It was called the Tree of Lights, because they didn't want to associate the state supporting a Christmas tree in a public square. So they hid it by calling it the Tree of Lights. That's why, you know, you're not allowed to have the menorah. That's a Jewish symbol. But the bottom line is after I won the case and the menorah was able to be placed in a town square, they converted, no pun intended, converted the name of the Tree of Lights to a Christmas tree. So not only was the case known for the menorah, but it was also known for being the first case after that. They called the Tree of Lights a Christmas tree, a very unique issue for the subject we're discussing now. So I couldn't hide as a Jew, not to say that I wasn't affected even by that.
Very good. Very, very good. So clearly you didn't choose fear. You didn't allow fear to consume you. But one of the most common responses is anxiety and deep fear. And so that's what we're going to address in lesson 1. We're not yet going to address our response to the anti-Semites. We're going to address our feeling of anxiety and fear. You know, they have the joke definition of a neurotic, that he worries about imaginary things in the past that never happened, unlike normal people that worry about things in the future that never will happen. You know, so the neurotic, we're normal people. We worry about things in the future. What will happen to us? What will be with us? What will be with the Jewish people? So that's an important topic. Then that's going to be primary focus of part one of lesson one, and then there'll be another issue that we'll address at the end: how to act, what steps to take in our personal life, not necessarily directed at anti-Semites directly. So, one of the problems with anxiety, as the Talmud states, text 2, page 13, it is stated in the book of Ben Sira, do not allow anxiety into your heart, for anxiety has killed the mighty. King Solomon said the same. If there's anxiety in your heart, quash it. We know that the power of anxiety can paralyze us, and it just makes us curl up in our bed and we can't move, and we can't respond because we're so worried and anxious what's going to be, that we end up not having any response to anti-Semites because we're just so afraid. Stan, I saw you would go ahead.
I don't know, maybe I'm unique, but this doesn't trigger a fear response in me. It makes me very angry. It's actually the opposite response to fear.
Very good. Okay. And we're going to try to address that also in this course. Okay. So what are some methods of avoiding unhealthy panic? And I see this group doesn't really suffer from that too much, but many Jews do. Many Jews suffer from a deep panic about anti-Semitism. So what are some things we can consider that can reduce this panic? Go ahead.
Regaining focus, breathing deep, controlling your emotions.
Okay, those are all for, panic in general, those are all helpful. Very good. So now we're going to go through three. Yes, and Joe, go ahead.
I had a client once tell me that some people practice passive resistance. He was more into active fleeing.
Can you explain that? Expound on that.
You get out of there. You know, you don't have to
run
hang
away.
around. Yeah, run away.
Right. Run away. Okay. Very good. Okay, so we have three main things that we're going to present here as part one of this lesson. There's two parts. Part one is one thing that can help us reduce panic is remember that we're a miraculous people. Number two, we're going to consider the full picture. And number three, I fear not because you are with me. These are the three things that we're going to expand on for the next 25 minutes. That when we remember these three things, we know that we have nothing to panic about. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have to take action, but we don't have to be panicked and contract and constricted and feel like we can't move and we can't do anything to act. So part one, the miraculous people. So there was a time many years ago, in about the year 1100, there was a great rabbi named Moshe ben Maimon, Rambam, or Maimonides. And what was happening in his time in Yemen in 1168 is that the Sultan made a decree on the Jews in Yemen that they have to convert to Islam or face severe punishment. At the same time, there was a Jew who was going around saying that actually you should listen to the Sultan's decree because Judaism is real, but now we're at a new phase and Islam is the continuation of Judaism. So, and he was a very charismatic person, and he was making Jews were having so many doubts. They had to deal with the Sultan's threat, plus somebody that seemed very respectable claiming that there was nothing wrong with giving in to the Sultan's threat and converting to Islam. And at the same time, there was an imposter Messiah, someone claiming that he's the Jewish Messiah, and he was also a charismatic leader, and they had all this confusion going on, and the Jewish community was very broken and paralyzed, and they didn't know what to do. And their leader wrote a letter to Moses ben Maimonides. He lived in Egypt, and he responded with the following letter. So let's read. Can I get a volunteer? Before we read Maimonides, let's read, we quoted earlier Devorah Lipstadt from her book, Antisemitism. Now we're quoting her from an interview. Let's get a volunteer, Steve Ender, if you can read for us text 3.
I don't have the book here.
Then page 14.
I don't have a book.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I have to get you.
Next week.
Okay, so you should check the email. In the email, there's email. But okay, perfect. But Steve, you check in the email that I sent out with it has a PDF, just so you can follow
okay.
the lesson. Okay, Joe, take it away. Text 3.
Text 3, historical anomaly. The fact that we're here is such a historical anomaly, it makes no sense. Sometimes when I'm asked about anti-Semitism, people will say, well, how can you be optimistic in all this? How can you see the positive? It's such a dreary situation. And I say, because we shouldn't be here, and the fact that we are here shouldn't be taken for granted.
Okay, so he doesn't panic. She says, we're here. If we're here, that's a reason for optimism, because it sets a historical fact that just like we were here under trying circumstances, we will continue to be here. Stan, take text 4 on page 15.
Hashem is, excuse me, Hashem ensured our father Jacob early on that although the nations would enslave his descendants, treat them cruelly and subjugate them, his children would survive and endure, whereas those who enslaved them would eventually disappear. Hashem told him, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, although they are destined to be trampled and downtrodden. As everyone tramples the dust of the earth, they will overcome and triumph in the end, just as, to continue the analogy, the dust eventually rises over those who trampled upon it when their corpses are buried. So Israel will remain in existence, whereas those who have trodden upon her will not. The Creator similarly assured us through his prophets that we will never be destroyed, that he will never permit our annihilation, and that we will never stray from being a nation devoted to its purpose. Just as it is impossible for Hashem's own existence to be nullified, so it is impossible that we should be destroyed and eliminated from the world. So spoke Malachi, I am Hashem, and I have not changed, and you, the children of Jacob, have not been destroyed.
Okay, so while recent events have put us on guard and tell us we have to be careful, at the same time we can be confident that the Jewish people will survive this. It's a fact. Just like dust is here, we will be here. So that's one thing that can help us reduce our panic. Additionally, and this is step 2, is to consider the full picture.
I was going to my lesson as always. By that time, I was wearing already a white band with a Star of David that had to be visible at all times. Now there were certain streets, certain sides that we were not allowed to walk because the guards, the German guards, the SS, the Wehrmacht or the Gestapo, whatever happened that they were in this particular time at this particular town at this time happened to go to their quarters. They had their quarters there, not far really from the boundaries that we had. And I was walking from the lesson, and I was elated. And I remember I was running late, and I couldn't wait to share it with my mother. And apparently when I walked energetically, somehow I swung my arms and the Star of David was not visible. Now, I was very hungry at that stage. I was very hungry. I don't remember if I had breakfast, if I had something or not, I just don't remember. But I just know that I saw 2 guards on the other side. I was walking on the right side, and they were coming down, and I didn't realize that the Star of David was not visible. But they crossed the street to me, and they both, on both sides, they stood next, sort of, I was in the middle, and they said in German, "Wo ist deine Schandebande?" which meant, "Where is your band of shame?" And without thinking, I said, "Das ist meine Ehrebande." This is my band of really not only pride, but Ehrebande. Ehre means honor. And this is the way it felt to me.
How old were you?
12, close to 12 anyhow, not far from 12. No, I wasn't. I wasn't really. I just was something like this, close, something 11 and a half, something like that, close. That didn't happen. That wasn't long after we came to Orkush, just a few months away. And they said Schande, and I said Ehre, Schande, Ehre, Schande, Ehre. And then I was just repeating Ehre, and then I don't know anymore. So then I woke up. I was at their quarters there.
The quarters?
Their quarters. They had their quarters. They must have dragged me there. I didn't feel it. Because I passed out from pain or whatever, call it whatever it is. And you would have thought that they waged the war against the Jewish children, because they kept saying, you say Schande, you say Schande, and we'll give you bread, we'll give you little sister bread, and even a little doll for your little sister, just say Schande. And I just couldn't, I just couldn't say this. And I thought, what can they do to me? I mean, I am not, I love my Jewishness.
Okay, so that's a video I just snuck in a few minutes before the course. It's just an amazing story of this woman, and I don't know her name, but she saw her. It's not a badge of shame; it's a badge of pride, a badge of honor, and that comes. One of the ways that you have that feeling, develop that feeling, is that the Jewish people are going to be here long past the Nazis are going to be here, and so I'm proud of my Jewishness. I have nothing to hide. So that's step number one. Step number two is to consider the full picture. Because you could say, okay, it's good to know that the Jewish people will live on, but there'll be many casualties along the way. How can I reduce my panic of that I won't be the next casualty? So one of the things to remember is that we actually have to put things in context. Although we saw the reports, and Bradley, I don't know if Bradley's on the call, but I got a message today. The AGC came out with a report, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and this report and that report, but we actually have to put it in context. And putting it in context does help us not feel that we'll actually be the next target. Because there's an index of questions that the ADL put that's been asking for many years. They've been asking non-Jews, Americans, regular Americans, a list of questions. And based on their responses to these questions, they can figure out if people carry 6 of these falsehoods as truths, then you know that the person has a serious anti-Semitic bent within them. So they didn't go around asking Americans, are you an anti-Semite? They went ahead and asked them this list of questions in figure 1.8, such as, Jews stick together more than other Americans, true or false? Jews always like to be at the head of things, true or false? Jews are more loyal to Israel than to America. Jews have too much power in the business world. Jews have too much control and influence on Wall Street. Jews are just as honest as other business people. Jews don't care what happens to anyone but their own kind. Whatever, and so on. And basically, whoever answers more than 6 of these questions in the affirmative, that Jews have too much power, too much control, only look out for themselves, and don't care and care for more than America. So they've been asking this question every year since 1964, and it's time that while there has been a rise in decline in intensity of anti-Semitic attitudes, while in 1964, 29% of the people surveyed responded affirmative to 6 of those questions, it dropped to 11 in 2019. So it dropped almost to a third. So less people in the country today carry anti-Semitic outlook of the Jewish people. So how do you reconcile these two? So either you say one of these charts are wrong, or you could say that, for a long time, anti-Semites were afraid to do anything about their feelings. And now, because in recent years, due to divisiveness, due to the internet, social media, however you explain it, anti-Semites have been emboldened to act, but there's much fewer anti-Semites than there ever was in the United States. So they could both be true. There are less anti-Semites, but the few anti-Semites that are there feel more emboldened to actually attack. So that idea could be very comforting, that there's less anti-Semites than there were, in the last generation. And if you look even broader, if you look even broader, much of Jewish history has been under antagonistic governments. Jews have never had a non-Jewish government that was favorably disposed towards the Jews. The governments have always been disposed against the Jews, have not respected our culture and our religion, and did not leave us alone in peace. And it's actually quite an anomaly that in the West, under democracies, and that's very recent that Jews in Jewish history, that Jews actually have freedom and liberty to act as Jews, at least on a state level or a federal or whatever, in a country level, that in Canada, United States, England, many countries, the states don't target the Jews, which wasn't the case in very recently in Russia and other countries, and definitely for most of Jewish history, that the states itself sponsored anti-Semitic Jewish people. So we are seeing anti-Semitic attacks, but they're not state-sponsored, and they're much fewer. And so these are things that are very helpful when we see the bigger picture. So number one, remembering that Jews will always be here gives us a sense of pride. Number two, remembering that even though there's a rise in anti-Semitic attacks, in the big picture, it's actually not that much, and it's not performed by governments, and anti-Semitic feelings have decreased. So that's phase number two. And finally, did I skip? That's it. And finally, we approach the third idea to constantly remember is when we nurture our relationship with Hashem, we never feel alone. One of the ways that people feel panicked is they feel helpless. And one of the things to remember is that we're not helpless. We have God on our side. God is always with us. Now, we can't always understand how God acts, but we can remember that God is always with us. And that's why you have this phrase in the Torah, this two-word phrase, the most often repeated two-word phrase in the entire Tanakh. That means the Torah and the prophets. And what is that phrase? Al tira, do not fear. Do not fear. How often? It appears in the Bible 44 times. If you include the plural, 70 times. And if you include tense variations, 110 times throughout the Bible, it says, do not fear. Why?
In January 1948, in the dark hours of the Soviet Union, a child was born in Stalino who was destined to symbolize mighty struggles. A bitter, global struggle between the bald eagle and the brown bear in the throes of their Cold War. A lopsided struggle between terrifying tyranny and human rights, between brutally enforced atheism and the free soul of a believer, between monstrous anti-Semitism and a proud Jew, and between the temptation to collapse and the superhuman will to survive. Nathan Sharansky graduated from Moscow's Physical Technical Institute before joining the underground human rights movement, reclaiming his Jewish heritage and emerging as a foremost dissident and spokesman for human rights. In 1973, Nathan took the calculated risk of applying for an exit visa to Israel. He was denied and rose to the forefront of Jewish refusnik activities.
Well, I was in the middle of the struggle when the situation looked very dangerous, when some of my friends in Helsinki group were already arrested, when new wave of repressions against Jewish activists was clearly prepared. And at this time, I received a note from my wife, Avital, through some American Jewish tourists. And together with this note, a small psalm book. And Avital writes that this psalm book was with me in the last year when I was trying to help you in different places in the world. And I have a feeling that the time has come to send it to you. And I opened the book, and I can't read there anything because I never learned how to read these texts. And also, most of the words I don't know. Many of the words I know, about 1,000 words, mainly of our daily struggle, prison, repressions, demonstrations, but not these words. So I decided I don't have time for these small things when I'm very busy now in organizing demonstrations and press conferences, and almost forgot.
In 1977, he was arrested on false charges of spying for the United States. But prior to the announcement of his verdict, he famously declared, "To the court I have nothing to say. To my wife and the Jewish people I say, next year in Jerusalem." Sentenced to 13 years imprisonment, he spent the next 16 months some 1,600 miles away from Jerusalem, in Moscow's Lefortovo prison, often in solitary confinement and in a special torture cell, before being transferred to a Siberian labor camp.
List of things that they confiscated, and there is mentioned this small black book, not in Russian, and I understand that they are talking about this psalm book which was sent to by Vital, and then I remember this note which is sent, and I demand that they'll give it to me, and it was a long struggle. 3 years after I was arrested, they returned this book to me, together with the telegram from my mother that my father passed away. And it's, of course, it's difficult when, it's always difficult, but when you cannot be with your family. And I decided that the only thing which I can do, I will be reading this psalm book until I understand. And so I'm reading these hundreds of thousands of words where I cannot understand where the sentence begins and ends, and cannot understand more than half of the words. And then simply comparing between different places of these words, I try to find out the connection between them. And it so happened that the first phrase from all these hundreds of thousands of words was a short phrase of 13 very short words, which I understood fully. That is the phrase, Gam ki elech bagay tzalamavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. It's from the Psalm Kav Gimel, and when you'll go through the valley of shadow of death, you'll fear no evil because you are with me. And that was very powerful. It was very important for me. And each time they were taken from me, I was fighting and on hunger strikes, refusing to work, sometimes refusing to eat until they'll bring it to me back.
He resisted and persisted with remarkable courage. His miracle dawned in 1986, when he was released in a prisoner exchange. Leading Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Shimon Peres, welcomed him to Jerusalem.
And even when they already took me from prison and replaced all my clothes, I was lying in the snow, refusing to enter the airplane without getting this book back, because I felt that all my strength is there. So that was the only piece of property which I took from prison, and all these years it's always with me, and it gives me a lot of strength.
The Hebrew phrases in Sharansky's Petite Black Book were authored 28 centuries earlier by King David, who reigned from the splendid city of which Sharansky dreamed, Jerusalem. It was he who crafted the powerful line of prophetic poetry that lent indestructible hope and undefeatable strength to endless generations of Jews in distress. Even if I must tread through a valley forged by death's own shadow, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. A fountain of eternal confidence generated on behalf of each Jew in every century in the face of the mightiest and most monstrous obstacles. You are not alone. God is with you. Walk with confidence. The Creator of the universe stands guard at your side.
Okay. So this is a very powerful idea on reducing panic, is that feeling like Natan gaining strength in prison, that God is always with him. And so the KGB could be torturing him, interrogating him, starving him, whatever they did to him. He said, I can get through this. I have the power to get through this because I know God is with me. When you're alone, it's very easy to fall into the overwhelming pressure of an outside force. But when you feel that someone has your back, God is with you, you can accomplish great things. And many Jews start off the week, Saturday night after Shabbat ends, and they're about to go into a tumultuous week full of worries. They say the phrase text 7 from Isaiah. Indeed, God is my deliverance. I am confident and I shall not fear, for God is my strength and my praise, and he has been my salvation. So the challenge is that we sometimes feel there's no precedent on which to base one's trust. We can feel, how can I be confident that things will work out? But we have to remember that God is always with us. And we always have to remember, and this is an important detail, how many blessings we do have. We tend to focus on all the headwinds, but we forget about all the tailwinds. We forget about the things that are pushing us along and all the blessings that we have. And when we put into perspective how many blessings we have, we take the blessings in life as granted. It's granted. I have blessings all over my life. Then that gives us a certain positivity. Okay, now we're going to move on to the final topic of this lesson 1 is, okay. Okay, this is an important idea. Okay, but before we move on to the next lesson, it's a powerful idea that when we have faith in God, it's not just it makes us feel better. It actually makes it easier for God to help us because we feel more connected. So we're able to act with courage. We're able to see things in the right frame of mind, and that actually makes it easier for God's blessing to rest upon us. So faith has a powerful tool, not just in keeping us calm, but also healing us. So now we have here's the big question that many people ask on what should our response to anti-Semitism be? So you say, okay, up the security, but shouldn't we just have faith in God? Shouldn't Jews just have faith in God that God will take care of us? They say, no, God wants us to help ourselves. So we're going to spend a few minutes to examine this important topic, because this topic doesn't just affect our response to anti-Semitism. It relates to a whole host of different life scenarios. So, for example, God is going to heal me. So, should I take the vaccine, or should I go for medical treatment? Should I take a surgery? Do I need to work, or God will provide for me? How do we balance our faith versus what we do? And the farmers in Israel are going through this right now. They say God provides for us, but in Israel, the farmers in the 7th year is a sabbatical year, and the sabbatical year, you don't work the land. So all the farmers in Israel are taking a year off. God's going to provide for us. And somehow they all survive. And the question is, why 6 years they have to work for food, and the 7th year they just rely on God? What is the balance? Both. But there's a lot of funds. People donate money to the farmers, and they have all these systems in place to help the population get food. People need fruits and vegetables, so they take care of that. So that's what we're going to tackle today. How do we, for the remainder of the lesson, how do we balance our faith in God? What role does our faith in God have? And where do we say we have to act like a heretic and do everything we can to protect ourselves and not rely on God? How do we balance it? Do we trust in God to do everything? Or do we say God has nothing to do with the picture, we have to help ourselves? What is the strategy? So for this part, we're going to look at the most famous early biblical anti-Semitic story. What is the most famous story where a man tried to annihilate all the Jews? And we're not talking about Pharaoh. We're talking about later on. Yes, Stan.
Mordecai and Esther.
Mordecai and Esther. Very good. The Purim story. In the Purim story, there's a man, Haman. Haman tells Achashverosh. Achashverosh is the king of the entire Persian Empire. And most of the Jews in the world lived in his empire. And Haman said, these Jews are different, they behave differently, and they have all these holidays, and they eat different foods, and we have to get rid of them. We have to destroy all the Jewish people. So Haman makes a lot, and he decides he's going to destroy all the Jewish people. Now, the Jews had a trick up their sleeves. The queen was Jewish. The queen was Esther. But Achashverosh didn't know she was Jewish. And now Mordecai, the uncle of Esther, tells Esther, now's the time that you have to go use your opportunity to intercede. Use diplomacy to save the Jewish people. Okay? And what does she respond? She says, the king hasn't spoken to me in a month. The king hasn't seen me in a month. This is a very stressful time right now in our relationship. The king is not interested in me, and there's a big risk that if I'm going to try a charm offense and I open up that I'm Jewish, everything will fail. So Mordecai says, well, God is going to save the Jewish people one way or another, and you might as well be part of the solution instead of being fearful. So let's read text 10. Who can read first? Ken, read first text 10.
Esther dictated a message to be sent back to Mordecai. Go and assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan. Let them fast on my behalf. Let them neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night and day. I and my maidens will fast likewise. And then I shall go to the king, although it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. Mordecai went ahead and implemented all that Esther had commanded him. On the 3rd day, Esther donned her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace.
So what do we see in this passage? One of the interesting things is we see, hold on, Esther clearly believes in diplomacy. Mordecai agrees with diplomacy. They're not about to do nothing, right? They're going to take actions. They're going to take steps. But yeah, Esther says, no. I'm not just going to take steps in diplomacy. I'm also going to turn to God. I'm going to fast for 3 days. Now, we all know what we look like at the end of Yom Kippur. And Esther's trying to play a charm offensive, right? Esther's trying to play a charm offensive. So how do you think fasting for 3 days in a way to, kind of supplicate to God that God, we've abandoned you, we've forgotten you, please help us. How do you think fasting for 3 days will it help her diplomacy if she's fasted for 3 days? You think no. You should become well rested, energized, work out, be strong, and that way you'll have the strength to go into a meeting with the king. And instead, and she's going on this nation-saving mission. she kind of ruins her chances by fasting for 3 days. So does she believe in diplomacy? Does she not believe in the importance of diplomacy? What's the balance? And the answer is that there's actually this divine human balance. On the one hand, we know we have to take a look to the Israelites in the desert. When the Jews came out of Egypt, they went into a desert. There was no food. They walked into the desert. There was no food. So how did they survive? God dropped food from heaven. There was manna from heaven. So you say, okay, that was in desert times. But when the Jews went into the land of Israel, now they had to make their own food. So that's the typical kindergarten view of what our relationship towards God, that until the Jews went into the land of Israel, God took care of us. After we went into the land of Israel, now we have to take care of ourselves. But actually, Esther did not believe that. Esther believed that in truth, even after we enter the land of Israel, God is still taking care of us. But he only takes care of us if we make a space for him to act in a natural way. We have to make a natural garment for his blessing to rest. In the desert, it was full frontal, open miracles. Now God has to hide those miracles in nature. And we do our part by taking a stance. So when Esther is doing diplomacy, she doesn't believe that the diplomacy is going to save the Jewish people. She believes God will save the Jewish people. But God only acts to save the Jewish people if the Jewish people make a space. And that space is a garment for God doing the miracles. So that was Esther's perspective. So when she was focused, she's like, where do I have to put my primary attention? To God or to the diplomacy? My primary attention has to be turned towards God. Then I have to do my part. Okay, so that was the strategy. So that's the same thing when it comes to medicine. When a Jew goes to a doctor, he doesn't think the doctor is bringing the healing. He thinks, and no offense to the doctors here, yeah, he does. He thinks God is bringing healing. God will heal me. But God wants me to make a space. We all know the famous joke of the guy underwater, struggling after a hurricane, and a safety boat comes and says, "You want to hop into my boat?" Says, "No, God will help me." Helicopter comes by, "You want to hop onto the helicopter?" He's like, "No, God will help me." And then when he comes up to heaven, he says, "God, why didn't you help me?" He said, "What do you mean? I sent you a boat and a helicopter." So God sends us, we have to make the space, because we have to make the space for God to help us within our lives. But always remember that it's God helping us. Now you say, okay, but why is it that way? Why does God do it that way? Why doesn't God just do open miracles? Let us give us man, or because it's actually part of a greater puzzle where God wants us, if we did everything, if there was open miracles, then of course we'd follow after God. It's like your uncle gives you $1,000 on your birthday if you call him, right? So who's not going to call on the birthday for $1,000? But that uncle really knows that if it not for the $1,000, he wouldn't be expecting a call, right? So what God wants, God doesn't want us just to call out to him because we gave, because he's going to give us $1,000. God wants us to make human activity, do human things like diplomacy, like getting our shots, like going and doing, opening a business. And that creates a space for God to come into our lives. Let's read that in the Hasidic terminology let's go through some slides first. So what role does human effort play? And why does Esther seem to undermine her diplomatic effort? So there's two phases. Jews in the desert, God provided. And the way we look at it, that currently we create our own blessings. God doesn't give us the blessings. We create our own blessings. But in truth, it's not just in the earlier stage, we were a miraculous people. And now it's kind of a partnership. In truth, even currently our earnings are gifted from God. And we all know people that are not that bright and not that so smart, and yet they're millionaires. And we know people that are very smart and work very hard and are poor. Our efforts are really just creating the space for God to give us the blessings in our lives. So our earnings are gifted from God, but we have to give God the space to act. So that's the paradox that we're trying to balance. That on the one hand, everything comes from God, but God created a world of concealment for some divine purpose, and we try to create that concealment. We don't want people to realize that it's all from miracles. So let's get a volunteer to read through text 11. And this takes some time, so try to focus your mind. Bradley, are you able to read for us text 11? Bradley's on the thing.
Oh, yeah, I don't have the text with me.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Bruce? Okay, we'll go back to Genya. Genya, text 11. What?
Page 28, is it?
Yes, page 28.
You want me to read it?
All right, Genya's gonna read it with the mic. We need your mic, Genya. Mike, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So creating space for God to hide. Everything that comes into being in this material world must materialize through natural means. Nature, however, is simply a garment, meaning God's energy bringing things into existence must be dressed, concealed, and obscured to the point that an observer sees only a world that appears to run naturally. In truth, however, everything emerges directly from God himself. He obscures the divine bestowals until the miraculous and supernatural reality of material existence is not observable and material developments seem perfectly natural. When, for example, God provides an individual with an ample livelihood, it is not done through a miracle as it was in the Sinai desert, when God rained manna and meat from the skies. Rather, God sends the blessing through the individual's business affairs. The gains reaped through the commerce appear so natural that the individual can be fooled into thinking along the lines of, it is my strength that generated this wealth, Deuteronomy, and it is my wisdom that led to my success. Ecclesiasticus. For I am well versed in commerce. I know what to buy and the most prudent times to sell. This arrangement works as long as we prepare a valid garment through which the divine flow of sustenance can descend into material reality. Our occupation must be proportionate so that according to the rules of nature, the sum required for our livelihood could theoretically be gained via such an occupation. If this requirement is met, our occupation serves as a perfect garment in which God can disguise his blessing. For we could easily claim, I acquire this wealth through my own skills, because it is indeed considered natural for such an occupation to yield that range of profit. Since such an assertion is logically sound, our occupation is an appropriate conduit for God's kindness. Accordingly, while we work, we should be mindful of our belief that our earnings are God's blessings. They are like any other open miracle. Like the miracle of the manna, our actions merely weave a garment behind which God can disguise his blessing. One should apply the same concept to all other areas of life. Pursue your needs in accordance with your understanding, with the intention of forging an appropriate garment through which God will send his blessing. God will then act as he sees fit, providing the truest form of good that is appropriate for you.
Okay, so this is an important idea. We have to do what makes sense, all right? But at the same time, remember that it's just a garment to God's blessing. Now you say, okay, so practically we're doing everything as if we don't believe that God is blessing us, because practically we have to do things in a natural sense. So what difference does it make if I believe it's God's blessing or not? Who cares? Practically, I'm still going to have to go to work. I still have to go to my doctor for treatment, and I still have to strengthen security at the synagogue to respond to anti-Semitic attacks. So what practical difference does it make if I believe, if my blessings come from God, or I believe in the strength of my activity? You know, there's one. So the difference will be when these two ideas that I do my part to, but it's a disguise on God's blessing. When we remember that we have to focus on God's blessing. So when God's blessing is in conflict, in other words, let's say, you know, we're stealing. So we come into a house and we think our theft will help us be successful. Well, we know there's a conflict there because our actions are only a garment for God's blessing. So to make a garment out of something that's a contradiction to God's blessing is not a good idea. So the same thing is, you know, it gives us perspective on how to prioritize. We want God's blessing. So just like we have to invest in a security guard, we have to go to the doctor, we also have to invest in our relationship with Hashem and do everything we can to fund and connect with Hashem. Let's read text 12. Joel, if you could read for us text 12 on page 32.
32. Between causes and garments. Esther's conduct demonstrated that she considered her act of approaching Achashverosh as a mere garment for God's salvation, knowing that would in fact be an entirely supernatural miracle. It was therefore necessary that the Jews first pray and fast to become worthy of such a miracle. Nevertheless, because God desired that the supernatural salvation should appear to be within the natural order, Mordecai instructed Esther to make an appeal to Achashverosh despite the grave risk. Consequently, it was not of great significance for the features of the garment to meet all the demands of the natural order, for the primary concern was not the medium through which God's salvation would arrive, but rather the need to ensure that the cause for salvation had been secured.
Very good. So, and what's so important to remember from the story is that it wasn't the case that the Jews had no other option. They had no other option just to fall back and to turn to God. They actually had an option. Their option was diplomacy. But yet Mordecai and Esther chose to recognize that this diplomacy is just a garment for God to bring his blessing to us, for God to perform his miracles. And so that's something important to remember for life. Now, where does this all leave us? You know, so we're going to conclude with a scare that happened in 1990. In the spring of 1990, there were many foreign leaders of Israel used to meet secretly with the Rebbe to discuss different important matters concerning the Jews of Israel. They felt that the Rebbe had certain important insight, and so they used to discuss with him certain things. So against this backdrop, in April 23, 1990, Mr. Eliakim Rubinstein was an aide to the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzchak Shamir, and he called the Rebbe with a brief message. Israeli intelligence had just received reports that the PLO had issued orders to strike Jewish targets around the world. So Rubinstein asked that this information be relayed to the Rebbe. So it was relayed to the Rebbe, and as soon as the Rebbe got this report, he gets up in 770, and many people were there to pray afternoon services. And he says in text 13, Steve Ender, if you could read for us text 13.
Text 13. An hour ago, I received word that the PLO commanded all of its international chapters to strike Jewish enemies and inflict bodily harm and much more. May it never come to be. We will not elaborate on such negative things. It is therefore necessary to underscore God's abundant blessing to all Jews in all places for all that they need, with the attitudes of happiness and authentic trust. Such emphasis should be placed on well-known directives. Think good and it will be good. Positive thoughts leads to positive outcomes. It is also appropriate to utilize this information, not to frighten, God forbid, with a happy attitude, think positively to add more matters of Torah and mitzvah.
Here, the Israeli intelligence community was telling the Rebbe, be worried, panic. The PLO is going to target Jews all around the world. And the Rebbe gets up and says, well, this is important information, so we have to up our game in seeing where we could correct ourselves in Torah and mitzvahs and to strengthen our relationship with God. And we always have to be positive, not to be afraid. Al tira, don't be afraid. And try to think how different that is from the natural reaction to either be fearful, to be angry, instead to be constructive, to be positive and joyful that things will be okay, things will be good, and to strengthen ourselves in Torah mitzvahs, in addition to the other steps we need to take. So first we see how the Rebbe was careful from the get-go not to brood in the negative aspects. He did bring it up because it was current news, but he said, we're not going to brood on this. It's a negative topic and we're not going to dwell on it. Second, the Rebbe went out of his way not to cause panic. And later on in the talk, you can check it out. He says, fear is useless. Third, the Rebbe underscored the need for us to build our trust in God, because God is our personal and powerful shepherd. King David says, I'm not afraid because God is my shepherd. Now, David had experience. When he was young, he was a shepherd. And he knew that why God loved David to be the king of the Jewish people, because he saw that King David would bring the little sheep to pasture first, so they would get the soft grass on the top. Then he would bring the elderly sheep second. They would munch on the regular grass. And finally, he would bring the healthy sheep to chew on the remainder grass, which was more tough and more harsh, but each one according to what they needed. And so God is like a loving shepherd. God is with us, and he gives to us exactly what we need. And fourth, the Rebbe said, with the worry reduced, now we can think of the actions to take. We can think of strengthening our relationship with Hashem through increase in Torah study or prayer and charity. And ultimately, the end of that story was that the threat never materialized. So you could have had a great panic with no results, panic for nothing. Like the neurotic who worries about things that never happened, we're worrying about things that never will happen. So that makes us almost equally neurotic. So we have to take things in balance. Now, there's a story I heard and connected to this, and I don't want you to get the wrong message. So I'm going to explain what I mean afterwards. But there was a Jew in London named Elazar Kalman Tiffenbrun. He had a kosher restaurant. It was the only kosher restaurant in the city at that time. And one day he sees these two hoodlums come into the store, and they're just walking around and looking. And later that night, he gets a call. Tonight you get the bonds. And he's extremely panicked. So he went rushing to call the New York to get a blessing from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, nothing will come of this. Don't even file a police report. And think good and it will be good. Everything's going to be fine. And keep the restaurant open. Don't even close it down. And this was very hard pill to swallow. Elazar's like, this is reckless and dangerous. But ultimately, nothing happened. Nothing came of it. There was no follow through. So a few months later, he was traveling to New York, and he had a meeting with the Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, I don't understand how you could disregard just a simple thing like making a police report. What could hurt? What's the big deal about filing a police report? So the Rebbe said, think about what happens if you file a police report. It's going to be announced in the newspapers that the kosher restaurant is a dangerous place. So there are Jews that their only option for kosher is your restaurant, and they're not going to be eating kosher for those few weeks when the restaurant is closed, or even if it's open, from the fear that there's a threat. So I don't want your takeaway from the story to be we shouldn't call the police and file police reports. The Rebbe is a Rebbe. How the Rebbe knows what's going to be, the Rebbe knows. We don't know that, so we have to file police reports and we have to do the steps that we need to take. But at the same time, to think of the outcomes, are we creating panic when it's not necessary? One of the great tragedies of people that are overly panicked is they're paralyzed from taking action, but they also see threats where there is none. Every single time somebody opens their mouth, they see a threat that isn't really there. And we have to make sure that we take steps to challenge the threats that are presented to us. But think of the tragic outcomes that could spur by overly panicking people. So I hope you gain some tips and tools for overcoming panic and the appropriate response. And I hope you feel some pride and joy in the upcoming week. And thank you for joining us for lesson 1. And unfortunately, our slideshow crashed. So I encourage you to go online. First of all, they have a beautiful additional readings. It's full color. It's a beautiful thing. But also, I encourage you to go online. What is the website? I don't know where the website is. There's a website where you could see all the videos again. And if we can have a volunteer to read for us on page 36, the key points of this lesson.
Could you text that information to us, Rabbi?
Yeah, it's going to be in the follow-up email together with the recording of this lesson. Yeah. Okay, so Barbara, do you want to read for us page 36?
Page 36, right? Well, I got to find it, right?
Towards the end.
33, 34, 36. Key points. Worrying creates dejection and ineptitude. To address an issue effectively, we need to reduce the anxiety associated with it. That was 1. 2, the Jewish people are an eternal people. History has shown that despite the pain and suffering that we have endured, the Jews and Judaism always survives and thrives. Recognizing this is an important step toward feeling optimistic about our people and about our future. 3, to be realistic means to not lose sight of the fact that we are living in one of the best eras for Jews, and we should be thankful for that. For the first time in millennia, the vast majority of Jews do not live under regimes that persecute Jews. And in some countries, while individual acts of anti-Semitism have risen, the data also shows that fewer people overall harbor anti-Semitic sentiments than previously. 4, the ultimate Jewish answer to anxiety is bitachon. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Bitachon. Bitachon. Sorry. We are empowered to ingrain in our minds a trusting attitude, feeling that God is going to take care of us and that He will be with us even when we pass through dark times. In fact, placing our trust in God triggers the opening of channels for additional revealed goodness. Do I continue or 6? Yeah. Everyone has to listen to my voice. 6, the Torah teaches us that the success of any of our endeavors is God's providence and blessing. Nothing in our lives is a mere product of nature. God instructs us, however, to create a garment through which His blessings can operate in disguise. Hence, we must take all the natural steps, whether to earn a livelihood or to protect ourselves from anti-Semites, but the blessing is entirely God's doing. 6, accordingly, our efforts to engage in the logical methods of protecting ourselves are inseparable from our efforts to secure God's protection. In the Purim story, Queen Esther recognized this, and she thereafter prioritized being worthy of God's protections over being attractive to Ahasuerus. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, am I?
Very good. Very, very good.
Could you Define bitachon.
Bitachon, the word bitachon means trust in God, feeling confident. There once was a stuntman who set up a tightrope across the Niagara Falls. And he turned to the crowd and says, "Who think I can walk this tightrope?" And everyone said, "We believe." He said, "Who thinks I could do it blindfolded?" They said, "We believe." "Who thinks I can do it while pushing a wheelbarrow?" He said, "We believe." "Who thinks I can do it with a person sitting in the wheelbarrow?" He said, "We believe." He said, "Who wants to get into the wheelbarrow?" No one, everyone froze up. No one wanted to take, we believe in the abstract. But this lesson is encouraging us to actually believe, put our full trust and confidence in God. And we'll leave it at that. Okay, I look forward to seeing you all next week for lesson 2.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Apologies.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very, very good talk.
Everyone,
Good night.
good night.
Good night.
Oh, thank you all for
Good
joining.
night.
Everybody.
Night, Rabbi. Thank you.
Very good. Brad, I put the book on your porch when you get home.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Very good. Excellent.